So yes, hi. Um, First of all, I would like to thank Venue.live for hosting this event with us. I'm going to present Matthias quickly and ask him a few questions. If you have any questions, you can use the chat. There's a question bookmark also, and I can bring those questions on the screen. So Matthias lives in Berlin. He was a co-founder and CEO of Travis CI. He's been selling the company since. He's been an entrepreneur in residence at Techstars. He's been a CTO at a few startups. And since he's been a consultant working with, you'll tell us, and an angel investor also. So thank you, Matthias, for coming in.
Well, thank you for having me, Sydney. It's a pleasure. If and if our pre-conversation to this was any indication, this is going to be interesting. But yeah, as you said, I
Yes.
mean, I'm a former engineer myself, former founder, CTO, CEO, and now I now work with other founders, engineers turned CTO, VP engineering, who followed a similar trajectory as a leadership coach. um, Basically giving them whatever shortcuts I can provide them with. And I've also been for the last couple of years working on a book called The Intentional Organization, which is also the same name as the business that I run with my business partner Sarah in LA, and we co-authored that book together.
Nice. Yeah, thank you. So maybe we can start by talking about the early beginnings of Travis CI. Can you tell us a bit, like the very beginning, like how did you came up with the idea, uh, and how did this service came about?
hmm I think, wow, this is a way back machine in a way. This conversation, this is all of this started 2010, 2011, I think, around that time. I think one of our co-founders at that point managed an open source project, and was frustrated that there were no testing facilities available. Facility meaning there was no easy way of doing testing. Back at that time, you had Jenkins, or maybe it was even still called Hudson back in the day. And that was not an easy thing to set up or maintain for, say, your own open source project. Right? And especially when it was run on GitHub. And GitHub at that point started to have pretty good, capabilities, like basic ones, but they were there so that you could start. There was an API that you could use. You could get notified, they say, when there is a new commit. And so he started building the first iteration of the tool, which was, it was a CI thing similar to Jenkins that you host yourself in a way. And like, as a follow-on step, I started building this into more of a multi-tenant solution, and it was run on Heroku back in the day, run on free infrastructure that was sponsored, and started at some point. I think this was 2010, opening it up to more open source projects on GitHub. And so there was, if you had an open source project on GitHub, you could just enable a webhook at that point. There was no fancy integration for this, and get started using Travis. And the infrastructure was very limited at that point. Um, like the infrastructure that we could actually use to run builds. And so, God, there was a time when we had like build queues that were thousands of commits long, which, looking back, was an interesting uh, counterpoint to the philosophy of continuous integration, which is like just get this done fast so that you get almost instantaneous feedback. And when that started taking off, like there were some inflection points when Ruby on Rails started using the CI tool, for example, with Travis CI at that point. Um, that was an inflection point, right? That's when it started really taking off, and that's also when people like, say, companies who ran or maintained open source project or contributed to them that were using Travis, when they started coming to us. I wasn't a part of that group back then, but they were coming to us, and I was like, we want this for our internal software, for our products that we build for our customers, right? We don't want the hassle of maintaining our own CI system. And that was the point where a company was finally founded. Before then, it was a hobby project, right? It was something that was a labor of love that was advocated for at conferences. There were mustaches involved, like actual real mustaches. And then yeah, a bigger group got together, started a company together, and we started turning it into a business. This was beginning of 2012. We we didn't take any like a traditional funding route. We Back at that point, we actually started collecting money through something akin to a Kickstarter campaign. Kickstarter was not an option for us back then, but it was like, here's a bunch of perks, say stickers, or a few other things. And if you give us this or that money, then you get, this is what you get. And if you were a company, which interestingly had quite a few of, you give us a bigger chunk of money, you get early access to the paid product, right? And so we started from 2000 and beginning of 2012 to just around September 2012 we started working on making making this work with private repositories, hiding things better so that it's stuff isn't accessible through just openly, improving the infrastructure that we had so that we could actually start getting customers on who then also, rightfully so, expected a different quality of service.
I
And you
think
tell me
Travis,
where I should stop. Like, it's
no,
like,
this is great. I think Travis CI was free for open source project at the beginning, and was it common for like companies to do free stuff for like open source projects, or were you
it
kind of
was
like the initial
common.
starter of this?
Sorry. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, go
It
for it.
was common for companies at that point to do free stuff, especially in the infrastructure space. Like Heroku was famous for that, right? It's like you got a whole bunch of, like, you could set up any number of apps on Heroku and got CPU cycles for free. And I think at that point, I think the idea to give this to open source projects specifically, that was not yet widespread. I think there might be a couple of projects before us, ahead of us, that did that kind of thing. I mean, a classic thing is the package distribution, say for Ruby, for Node.js. All those things started out as, again, labors of love and turned out into, well, every now and then, infrastructure nightmares, as it does happen when you provide free infrastructure to folks. Like, it's eventually someone starts to abuse that privilege, which we dealt with quite a few times through our lifetime.
Interesting. And when did you see, was there any like pivotal moment where you saw like, okay, this is a thing, we're starting to have like paying companies using the product, and I'm gonna go fully onto this, or we have a good growth now. Where did you see that happening?
hmm That was end of 2012, and it wasn't the end of the year that counted. It was more, at that point, we had 100 customers. We had, a price that was higher than what was common, a lot higher than what was common in the CI space. Back then, I think infrastructure offered, or even also other CI services, offered very cheap plans. They all had funding, and we had, even though we did this crowdfunding round, that was not a lot of money. Like, right, it was not money that would, at that point, it wouldn't have taken us beyond the end of that year. So there was a part where the end of the year mattered, but at the end of the year, we had 100 paying customers. And for me, that is something, especially when you sell something to businesses, like when, from a SaaS business standpoint, to me, that's still a useful milestone. It doesn't say anything of, can you scale this to tens of thousands, or can you scale this product? Can you start selling it to large enterprises? But that also wasn't our ambition back then. We just wanted to bootstrap the business together, and turn it into something interesting that we, and an interesting company that we all, wanted to continue working at.
Cool.
But
And
at that point, just for maybe some wee background, it was still private beta. the product. Like we still,
Wow.
because we were still manually managing the infrastructure at that point, like we were very, very concerned about scale and not taking on too many customers. So we only had, or through our website, there was, I think until maybe early 2013, we only took, a select number of customers. Like you could go to our website and sign up for the beta. At some point, we removed that and instead only say 10 people could sign up every day, something like that, right? But we were in private beta in that effect until June 2013. Definitely too long, but also like there is, even if you launch a beta product now, I would still advise people there's no problem charging money for that, right? Just because it has a beta label on it. Like it's still, if it provides value to somebody, put a price tag on it. And then if you can prove out whatever high quality service you have, maybe improve on it before you make it generally available. It's a great time to do that and great validation.
Interesting. The fact that you only allowed like 10 sign up per day. This is this is fun.
It was, yeah, it
How
was
did you?
pure
Yeah.
necessity, really. Like we basically spun up real physical servers every now and then once, we reached the capacity threshold. Eventually we moved everything over to EC2 and other cloud things, but at that point it was all there was manual work involved.
How did you prioritize features and manage a product development cycle at this stage? Was it through like conviction or through like customer feedback? Any specific way you manage that?
I would say it was both. The conviction was there. We also had, we had Signal, like, GitHub evolved around that time, started, like 2012, they started a new API, like what we now take for granted. We were talking about pull requests before this call, right? What we now take for granted, the status things on those pull requests, all the stuff you can do before summer of 2012, that wasn't there. So there's an entirely new set of tools that was suddenly available. But I think, if I look back at those first couple of months, we spent a lot of time just trying to keep things stable. That was a big effort. There was, we hit we hit other thresholds of scale where things just started breaking in the weirdest ways. Like early Travis versions were reliant on, say a build log output be that it is sent in the exact order, right? And it's stored that way. And the entire system was based on the idea that there was one log file. Came in through some sort of continuous stream, and the system doesn't concern itself with anything else. I think just looking back, like 2013, even the first half was really rebuilding that entirely. And that meant we had to basically touch everything. And that took several months. Like, just again, I was just reliving those experiences now. It's so interesting after such amount of time. But yeah, that was at that point when we were still private beta. We That's what we worked on, getting things to the point of stability where we were comfortable, then opening it up, right? And so we just kept finding new pain points like that throughout probably the following year, even into 2014. But at a certain point in 2013, we were comfortable enough to just say, okay, this is now working. One of our biggest scaling issues is resolved. We can somewhat predict what our infrastructure demands are going to be based on past experience. We're just going to open it up and see what happens.
Cool. Did you regret any technical decisions that you made at the time that you would probably change if you knew?
Oh boy. Yes. Oh my God. Yes. I mean, all of us founders were engineers. And sometimes that also brings, I'm just trying to figure out how to put this nicely. Um, and even just just giving us some leeway in retrospect. Um, I think there was a tendency even back at that time. I'm just going to frame this around our founders team to over-engineer things. Right? It's something needed to be perfect, something needed to be well crafted. Um, it needed to be clean. Of course, it needed to be well tested. I think that was the one thing that even culturally we paid attention to. Is this is what we sold. Um, but yeah, I think that is like one particular piece I remember we were rewriting and extracting how we sent like build notifications like from different stages of the build. Like, hey, here's a notification that this build started. Here's a notification that this build ended or failed, succeeded, whatever. Um, and we were rebuilding that, and then we spent way too much time on that. And this was during the time when we were, actually building towards, that commercial launch to actually get some people to pay us. And I think another example is like I wrote the billing system back then, and it's probably the thing I'm least proud of. It took me 3 months to get that finished. Like
Wow.
I can, bring all kinds of excuses. I tried, I played around with different, like at that point, Ruby on Rails idioms and ideas in that, in the billing system that seemed fun. But it took a ridiculous amount of time to get that finished. Like it should not take 3 months. I mean, I can bring up all kinds of excuses why that took so long. And nowadays, you would probably integrating something like Stripe probably doesn't take you. I don't want to, underappreciate the work, but it shouldn't take you 3 months. I think that's another one. And I think, like deeply technically speaking, it's maybe not a choice that I regret, but it was that was an evolution, and it was also not a choice I initially made. It wasn't on me, but we definitely paid a lot of. We paid up. Well, we paid for that, and just investing time and nerves, and that was that the initial Travis CI construct, like everything that ran in the backend that basically controlled send off builds, took in log streams and things like that. That was a monolith. So it was a single process thing, which it took us, I think, about 2 years to fully disassemble this piece into smaller chunks that we could then run independently, scale independently, and basically removed bottlenecks by this. It wasn't necessarily the monolith itself, but the fact that the monolith could only run as a single process. There could only be one. There was no coordination between them. In any case, or that didn't exist back then, and we invested a lot of time pulling that apart. So it was early technical choices that do come back to haunt you. But I think that's kind of a natural part almost of building a business. Like you just you need a fine balance of putting in just enough effort to get something off the ground, and sometimes or can expect that there will come another threshold of customers or usage or whatever where you're going to have to rebuild the thing. Maybe those thresholds have moved, right? Because, some stuff is a lot easier to build and scale and put into, smaller chunks these days. But I still come across that with, the clients that I work with. So it's not entirely
Yeah.
off the agenda at this point.
What's your take on testing? You mentioned that. I mean, you were Travis CI, so you had to do testing. But would you recommend a startup in the early days, like before product market fit, to spend a lot of time on this, or would you maybe consider like not having tests straight away and only when you start like having real users?
Ooh, it feels like a trick question, but I mean, I also understand it's not an easy one. I think um, I might offer an answer that might not be satisfactory. It's like, and it's not an exact measure. Like it needs to be just enough testing that you can have a certain level of confidence about whatever you throw into production, right? That whatever helps you be sure that in some of the ways that you expect. This does what I want it to, right? Or some of the faulty states that I can, think of, or that I build up over time as my customers start using it. You start building up a test suite. And I know there's no exact threshold here, right? There's no, you need this amount of test coverage or that amount of test coverage. And those metrics are generally not as meaningful anyway. Sometimes it's just a useful or regular discussion to have. To just like how much did stuff break? Like, what was that stuff we didn't test? Should we invest a little bit of time to test this more? And then still build out that test suite, because it's going to be ridiculously harder to rebuild any or start building any kind of testing thing from scratch when you finally hit that whatever the threshold is, where you think, okay, now we need this level of certainty or assurance that this is working right and well, right? So it's certainly don't buy into the 100% test coverage kind of
Coverage.
school or other kind of schools. In a way, it's more like, whatever works and like is, fulfills the parameters that you have. May that be performance, stability, security, quality, or whatever else you get, or speed, like, or scope, value to the customer, whatever criteria you can think of, or you set yourself at that particular stage of your company. That's what you go for, right? It's all, no matter which ones you optimize for, it's trade-offs. It's trade-offs all the way down. And I think maybe the important thing is to just be aware of that, and to maybe, yeah, have a regular conversation, like, what trade-offs are we making now? Is it worth making these trade-offs, and what are we expecting maybe down the line, if we can make an educated guess at this point? If not, we'll either we change our minds now, or we will have to deal with it down the line. But I mean, the flip side to that is, like, if you say you spend all of your time and effort optimizing for all of these things, like, your customers don't care, right? They care a little bit that things are stable, things are secure, reasonably fast, but they don't care about most of the other things. They care about that they can use your product, and whatever the right constraints are at any particular moment in time or any stage of your company. That's what you go for. You still need to balance it out with, how can we still get stuff out to customers, right? And not spend 2 years rebuilding this entire thing in the hope of achieving this or that goal while doing nothing else, right? That's the extreme, but I mean, it's happened. I've been part of these projects as a software engineer myself, and they happen often enough still. So yeah, there's a classic coach answer, which is just, it depends.
It's not black and white. I completely
Yeah.
agree with what you say. Let's switch topic a little bit. Let's talk about building and managing teams. Um, I'd like to have your view on, like, how do you define effective engineering leadership, and what lessons you have learned, because you were the CEO of Travis CI a few years back, and now you're a consultant helping companies. Your view has probably evolved over time, and I'm curious to know
Mhm.
what you've learned.
Yeah. I mean, interestingly, I started my management career under the guise, and this was still very, very much en vogue back then, was that you shouldn't need management, especially in a group of software engineers. I fell into that trap, but this was even early as we founded Travis. But over time, we also realized that it doesn't work. That I spend all my days writing code. I have a very specific memory that I can talk about when that inflection point came to be. Um, Effective engineering leadership. So I mean, I think a traditional school of thought would offer things like, get out of the way, trust your team, things like that. But that is too unpractical, I think, on some levels. I think effective engineering leadership starts with being really clear on what you want your team to do, right? And that can be a list of, say, 3 goals for the year, for the quarter, whatever it is. Um, That's one, right? Ideally, there's some level of document, like say a strategy that supports those three goals, that describes to achieve these three goals, we're going to do this, this, or that. For example, to get back to the earlier question, like we're going to sacrifice these two things, say, just hypothetically, we sacrifice test coverage and a little bit of performance to achieve these three other things. And to do another thing we're going to do that is say something really controversial. We're going to have, because we need to speed up our delivery process, we're going to have the entire team not work in pull requests or in feature branches, but commit to the main branch. Just hypothetical. I mean, that's my favorite wasp nest to poke in many engineering organizations still. But say that's a thing. It's a behavior that say you as a CTO or as a senior engineering leader, you want your team to. That's a behavior you want them to do, right? There's something you want them to do differently. So you have clarity on goals. Like this quarter, we are going to spend say 30% of our time breaking up the monolith, just as one example, right? It's very specific, but it is one. At least it's some sort of clarity on what you want your team to do. And so we have these goals, we have a strategy, and then next step is like how involved am I as the senior leader or manager in decision making, and is that a good thing? Right? Is my team always coming to me with whatever questions they have? This happened to me in the early stages of a tenure as a CTO, where people just kept coming to me with their questions, and it's like, I don't know. Like, I'm new here. Like, I don't, and this is a very technical question. Like, I would like you to know. I would like you to not just understand, but also maybe come up with an idea of how we could do that. Right? This doesn't apply to all problems that somebody comes to you with, but there's a certain spectrum of problems that engineers or or the managers that report to you have, where it seems effective to me that they should just be able to make these decisions on their own, right? And so you get from offering the goals and strategy, which are some key boundaries in this decision making, right? It's like, if it doesn't support the goal that we have, if it doesn't support the strategy that we have, then we don't need to actually do this, because this doesn't fit, right? So it's an easy way to say yes or no, or to actually give your team a tool to say yes or no. And this is where this is the getting out of the way part of effective engineering leadership. It's like you give your team a sense of clarity on what they're supposed to do, and a sense of clarity on how they're going to make decisions around, say, what they're working on, right? Or whether they bring in a new programming language, a new framework, to whatever level you want, on whatever level you want this to happen. I think those, to me, that's where it starts, right? And then you get into all kinds of other directions, like being able to give effective feedback. Someone might, depending on what role it is or how the role is defined in a certain organization, like technical decision making or architecture, depending on whether, say, you attribute that skill or that responsibility to, say, an engineering manager role or to a CTO, right? But there's a whole other layer below there. But I think if we're to just summarize it on the spot, it comes to these three things to me. Like, it comes down to that: just being clear on what the direction is, having clear goals or priorities in place, having some sort of strategy that supports these things, that outlines certain behaviors, certain practices that you want your team to pick up in pursuit of these goals, and then if your team being able to make decisions, ideally without you. I mean, I also, be honest, I have a certain, laziness is one of my leadership principles, and I don't mean laziness in the sense that I don't want to do anything, but laziness in the sense of, how can I make sure that this, whatever question or problem this person comes to me with, that doesn't happen again, right? How can I automate this away? And so that's
I
where,
like this.
decision making usually is the first step to get there, like in the trajectory of the say the CTOs that I work with. And I'll pause here.
Thank you. I agree. I think having a clear vision and communicating effectively on that vision really helps in like giving responsibilities around.
Yeah.
Let's talk about like scaling teams. What have you found effective in like hiring? Because I'm guessing at some point, maybe in 2013, you started hiring more engineers and more people in the company. What worked for you?
Oh, that's a very broad question. Where do we start? Um, let's see. Wow, now I'm reliving. I mean, I'm thinking if I, if I look back to those days, or maybe some earlier example, like in the early days of Travis, like a lot of the people we hired actually came out of the our community. Interestingly enough, there were people who, in some way had contributed to Travis, the open source project. So we didn't, need to have a hiring process or something like that. We It's just, yeah, people fell into our lab, which is, not a scalable or successful strategy in a way to hire people, but it was what we had at the time, and it worked out pretty well. Once we did start, hiring for folks, I think, and this is the work I still do with folks today, is I think a key thing is to really have a clear hiring process, and clear, not just saying, uh, we do this or that interview, but rather we do this interview for this particular reason, right? And this is why these folks are there. And in this interview, this is the set of questions that we ask, right? And there's a spectrum of answers that we think are good, and it plays into the scaling part of your question, because when you have this process documented, say I, as the boss, don't need to be involved anymore, right? I can just give these tools, these processes, these questionnaires to my team, and they can start doing these evaluations, right? And there is because we have some sort of documented way of doing that, how we evaluate candidates, what answers we find good or bad, or how we rank these answers, is is documented. As there's a clear framework that you can just give to your team, and so they can do that without you. That is one. I think the other one is that we basically removed pretty early on is, and this is going to be interestingly and potentially controversial, is coding exercises. We didn't. I think we tried those for a while, maybe early on, but ended up removing them because these exercises did not reflect our company culture. Right? It's not Our company culture was built on, as one of the values was collaboration. And so we kind of took that as as our guide, which is really what values are for, on, how we should structure these or how we should structure, say, and any kind of work package in the hiring process. Right. And that turned out to be like, we ended up doing a pairing day, right? Where, a candidate came in and started working together just to see what is that flow of energy, right? Are we doing what, like, what kind of question are they asking, what are they looking for? It wasn't, the give me an answer to, some sort of sorting algorithm, or build me, this particular tool or that particular tool. We could have done that. We're an open source project, and we had plenty of open issues from the community that someone could have worked on, but it was also such a complex system that it wouldn't have been feasible as well. So, like, just, removing this coding exercise part and really focusing on more, what do our company values tell us to do? uh still find that very helpful. And I mean, company values are there for a reason, and this could be one of them. And I think a third thing was, I mean, there's a hidden thing in there where we didn't have questions that were of a superficial technical nature, right? This wasn't, tell me, or write me some sort of construct that does this or that, or that, how do you, in this particular framework or language, how do you build this idiom or that idiom? Or, explain to me how a certain, again, like how a certain sorting algorithm worked. Like we didn't have questions like that because they didn't reflect the work that people would actually be doing. And that work wasn't, writing sorting algorithms. Maybe that happens once every couple of years, but it, didn't really uh, happen during the everyday work. Um, Last thing, I'm still working on that with clients today, is looking at the hiring process as a way to get people in, not to keep them out. And like many hiring processes are built around the idea of, putting barriers in place in a way that, candidate needs to overcome. There's a hurdle, or maybe there's the maybe people set traps for them, where it's like they ask them a question and they have a very specific answer that they expect, and if that person on the other side doesn't give that answer, they're out, and they don't actually know what they're expected to provide, right? Like I've had this with a client where there was a question that they asked that was supposed to say something about how passionate they are for for the business, for the product, or whatever. I don't remember specifically, but there was, a certain meaning or expression that the person looked for. I explained, we went through this entire process, and I basically just explained to them, so here are all of your interview stages. Here are all the questions that you ask. And with every one of these, you keep more people out. And also this was, in that same conversation, we talked about, building a more diverse team, right? Which was a big focus for us at Travis, where when you have these barriers in place and you don't think about them as barriers, but to you, they're, they're filters, right? They're filters with very small holes where a certain type of candidate comes through, and that's the perfect candidate for you. But at the same time, you keep a lot of people out. And that client was asking me, so how can I get more women through this pipeline and in my company? I was like, well, you start looking at your entire hiring pipeline and start looking at every single step and how it might keep people out that have, say, they have families, right? They have families, they have someone to take care of, they have whatever, right? There's the whole slew of attributes that you could, that are yet you can easily exclude, that, life attributes, or like that people, situations people dealing with in their lives, that you're keeping them out for that. I mean, the same thing is like, years of experience with this language, or years of experience in that, or certain types of degrees, things like that, right? All of that they're meant as filters. They're also barriers, right? I think the starting to think about whatever we put in place as evaluation criteria or things we look for in the hiring process as barriers that I would like to remove, under the assumption that, hey, let's assume this, this person that is at this stage of the interview process, they seem pretty good, and we would, let's assume we would like to hire them. What do we need to do to make sure that's a good decision? And then, we'll do that. If it turns out correct, great. If it doesn't, we haven't, we've lost a little bit of time, right? I mean, in the end, all of these barriers exist so that you can save time in the hiring process, right? It's
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing. I have another question that I've personally experienced, that somebody asked from the audience before this call. Um, Imagine you have somebody that is like um, a highly talented developer, but is a really bad team player. Like he doesn't get along well with the team, and he's got his humor. How do you deal with this kind of people? Have you had this in your experiences, or and how do you deal with them?
I'm smiling a little bit because with most of my clients who are, growth stage CTOs, they start growing, they start working with teams of 10, and maybe we work together until it's teams of 100 or 150. um, Everyone, almost everyone, experiences that in their team. It's sometimes it's an early engineer who joined the company early on, who had a big drive for um, autonomy and just doing their own thing, and just as the company grew and more people grew, came in around them, and they started maybe losing a sense of authority and influence, and also weren't happy with where the company was going and all the processes that suddenly exist, so much bureaucracy and these things like that. And they asked me what should they do, and I can only offer them one answer. And I'm not sure, what the person who asked expected. There is only one answer to the question. You can build in a space in between between you asking this question and between you finally making the decision, right? There's things you can try, or there's feedback conversations that you can have, or uh, a framing that I like to ask people to do is, again, it comes back to values, right? Ideally, you have certain values either for the entire organization or for your engineering team, which in effect are behaviors that you want to see in the team. And there's a flip side that are behaviors we don't want to see, right? If they're not listed here, we have a discussion about, are these behaviors we want to see, and do we include them in the list of values, or do we somehow build them in, or do we not? And if you have that conversation with that person, or even if you look at them just through the lens of, is this person espousing the behaviors that I would like to see in my engineering organization? Are they doing that? If the answer is no, and say you have this frame, these values laid out, if the answer to that question is no, you go to them. You can go to them and say, this is, here are our values. Here's all the stuff you've been doing lately that doesn't match our values. What are we doing? What are we going to do about this? What are you going to do about this? Here's what I would like you to do about this. Or, tell me what your perspective on this is. And there might be a slew of frustrations coming your way. That's the intermediate space, having the conversation around what is the current state of things, and also just gauging after, say, I give them certain feedback and set different expectations on what they should do differently. I give them some leniency to actually do that, but if that doesn't happen, there's only one answer: they need to go. Right? It's like you could try all kinds of things. People have the wildest ideas. Like, I could just move them to another team, or I could just push them off here into this their own team, this team of one, basically, where they just work on their own stuff. Um, that's those kinds of things. Like, I just hire a new engineering manager and make it their problem. Right? It's all strategies just to get rid of the problem without actually getting rid of the problem. Because say you're moving this person into their team of one, they're still going to be doing what they did to this day. They're still going to come back, give horrible feedback and pull requests, be rude to other members of the team, talk down on other folks. All of that is still going to continue, right? It doesn't matter if you push them into a different team. If your organization is big enough, say you have 1,000 or 10,000 people, then a person like that doesn't matter. To a startup that is anywhere between 10 or 100 or 200, that kind of person matters a great deal, because their behavior impacts everybody else. And that's the other angle that I like the folks that I come to me with, is I ask them to look at. Like, one is, or is this person showing the behaviors that you want to see in your team? And this is like, if God, now I lost that train of thought. Jesus. Damn. Forgot what my second point was. Anyway, that's what it comes down to. The behaviors you want to see in your team, and do you see any possibility for change in these behaviors? And if not, there's only one answer. I think this a little bit this comes into the question of what does performance mean, right? In an engineering team, is performance a part of is a part of the performance equation of how people behave or how they live up to our values, right? Or do they act counter to these values in a way, right? And when you frame it like that, it gets easier to look at a person and say, well, they're not. So I do. You can do whatever your performance framework dictates, or you do, if you don't have that, you do whatever is within the company values, or if none of that matters, you part ways with that person.
I agree. I think software is a team sport, and if you cannot work in a team and you've been warned a few times, then there's probably no place for you in the company.
Yeah, and that reminds me of the second point that I was trying to make. Like be beyond, like it was that person is toxic, right? Their behavior impacts other people in the team, as you said, right? This is a team sport, and if someone starts dragging people down, belittling their contributions, and being not just being a good sports person, say, like just being able to look at things without imposing their own opinion straight away, right? That's where that's the other side of that equation, because if people keep doing that, that pulls the entire team down. And like again, like speaking in terms of performance, it impacts their performance heavily, right? It makes, in the end, it can lead people to burn out, leave your team because they're unhappy, things like that. And that's the business risk side of that equation, almost, of the quest of that question. It's like, what is the risk of losing this one engineer versus the risk of losing many other engineers of your team that don't show these behaviors?
I think this is a great transition. Let's talk about burnout. I think we have a question from Shahul Namid. I'm going to bring this up. But what if you have somebody in the company that is burned out? How do you support that person? Do you have any like knowledge that you should have? I'm guessing you probably question your culture, but do you have anything for the person experiencing that you should help them with?
So we're talking specifically about burnout, right? That was, or maybe
Yeah,
the
let's.
question is more about mental health also, which
Yeah,
they slightly do two different
it's two
things, but
different
also
things. Yeah,
related. Mm, I mean, the burnout question, like I mean, this brings me back to days when I worked as part of a US team as CTO, and I actually had to force people to take time off. Like there's this different, I mean, I come from a German work culture where our time off is just,
I'm
that's,
French.
yeah, exactly. You get it. Like this, our vacation time is, that's
Set in
gold. We
stone.
protect it.
Yeah,
It's set in stone. We protect it. Um, and I had to force people to go, and I also had to force people to, well, I almost had to lock their accounts because they would just pop in when they were on vacation. There's a work culture thing, all fine and good. And what I'm mentioning this is, um, I think a first step is when you see someone is close to burning out, is the conversation to have with him. Like, a when are you taking time off? Like, I need you to take time off, even if it's 4 weeks. I need you to take time off. Like, come back after 4 weeks when you're fully recharged. The other is, what needs to happen for that to be possible, right? Because maybe this person is, you say, a key engineer, right? They carry a lot of knowledge. This person has been uh, in with the company for a while. They carry a lot of institutionalized knowledge, which hasn't been spread yet. And so we start talking about what that process is looking like, right? What are the key processes that still point to that person, where they are the hotspot in whatever graph you draw? All the arrows point to that person. That's where the danger zone lies. And so I like to just do that exercise every now and then, even with my clients. And I did it back then. It's like, who's the hotspot in my organization? And when I had this with, say, a director reporting to me, we started looking at the some of the really critical processes that they were still doing, that they were the only one capable of doing, that they took on themselves on their under in the spirit of protecting their team from this work, right? It's We don't do this always by through malicious intent, or because we just we just work for 14 hours a day because it's fun. Sometimes it is just because there's a sense of duty that keeps coming back to haunt you, because you keep having that sense of duty, and whatever the duty is just keeps on happening. And because it keeps on happening so much, there's no time to involve somebody else, right? And so we started that particular process of, okay, next time you do this process, you get someone else in. Doesn't matter if you feel like this disrupts their time, right? You get another person in, then you have that person observe you. You start talking to that person about what you're doing, what's going through your head as you're doing this, what might you be thinking about. And that's pair programming almost for delegation in a way. And delegation is really where this comes back to. It's like whatever that burden is that keeps this person busy, uh, busy not in the good way, is you want to spread that burden over more people. That's ultimately the goal. And so you start, there you have to start having that other person do that process. You start documenting that process. And that's what we did back then. I started documenting all of the steps that that person did, say, for to cut a new release. Right? Seems so simple and logical in a way, but those steps just weren't documented. There was like a bunch of scripts that were maybe on somebody's computer, and so you start a process of identifying those. Right? That does mean that other work that might seem important takes a step back, right? You at least devote some of your time, whatever the critical thing is that you need to hand off to somebody else, that whatever this person is currently responsible for. I think that's my framework in rough terms for the manager side. I think for when you burn out in more generic terms, as you already said, there's a cultural aspect to this where you need to look at what's the kind of culture we want to have here, right? Or why do people feel compelled to work long hours? Why do they feel compelled? Or another reason why people start burning out is because they are so busy fixing bugs, fixing production issues, and never really getting to a point uh, where they can work on something meaningful in a way, right? It's not like fixing bugs isn't meaningful, and that responding to a production outage isn't meaningful. But if you keep doing it over and over again, and it's similar things that keep coming back up, you just there's less joy in that work than in actually building something new and shipping out value to a customer. That's another reason why people burn out, like if it's close to engineers. And I think in all of these things, this is one conversation is, when are you taking time off to recharge? And because good for a friend of mine used to say, maybe more than 10 years ago, like, vacation is cheaper than severance. That's still a nice mental framework to keep in mind. Right? It's cheaper to send somebody on a vacation for 2 to 4 weeks than not just the severance package, but also all of the other costs. Hiring, that entire hiring process, onboarding someone, trying to regain whatever knowledge is lost. Vacation is a whole lot cheaper than that. And so that's, talking about vacation is one. The other is having the conversation about what are the reasons? What are the reasons why this keeps on? Why people keep burning out? And what do we need to do? There is a point where, yes, say you as the CTO or the VP engineering need to say, maybe also to other senior leaders, it's like, for a little while, we need to stop doing this and actually start doing this for a while, maybe a month. Like, it doesn't need to be 2 years of rebuilding a thing, but at least gradual process towards solving whatever issues exist that make, that are the causes of things just breaking, or bugs coming back, whatever that is.
Thank you. Um, I'm gonna ask you one last question.
Yeah.
Do you use Do you use AI? And what are you most excited about AI today? It could be in the CI/CD space or anything else. And my question is also like, if you were a founder again today, what would you build? Like, do you have any like ideas that you would pursue today as a founder?
I wish I had an answer to that second question. Like I'm even working as a coach, I am trying to. There's always a mindset, a product mindset of what's a product that I would like to build. What product is a thing that that could solve problems that I see in my coaching practice every time. Like the book that we wrote is one such product, but of course it's not a product in the traditional sense, or in the sense that you're building software to do this.
Yeah,
In terms of AI, I'm I'm of many minds in this issue. Um, and I'm not really sure I have a fully formed opinion. Like I'm not using it myself these days, I'll be
okay,
honest there. And when it comes to writing, like which I do quite a bit, if it's about preparing presentations, or writing columns that I do or new articles or things, I just write these things myself. Maybe there's a certain level of pride there, or just it's just the sheer joy of the work of the creative process that I like. I have used it for just for mundane stuff, almost for just getting generic images for presentations. But
right.
it's not really a satisfying answer. I can say. Um, I
That's
mean,
okay.
the interesting things where if I think about tracking things, measuring things, um, in the the sense of maybe in the realm of CI, or maybe even code or production things. There are simple things I think about, maybe not complex things. And yeah, I'm afraid I don't really have a good or satisfying answer. Like it's a thing that's on my radar. I think about it a lot on a philosophical level, which I also, said to you before this. Like I don't spend a lot of time in the space of CI anymore, but rather CI, or continuous integration, delivery, improvement. Those things happen. I'm interested on a more maybe abstract level, but it could still be fun to see how an AI integration could reduce breakages, whatever it is, production breakages, build breakages, easier fixes. I mean, these things probably already exist today. I don't know enough about that at this point. It's like maybe I mentioned an inflection point earlier about when really started focusing on management. That is almost exactly 10 years ago. And I'll also be honest, like I haven't touched a lot of code since then, right? Like it's 10 years. I've been mostly focused on management, leadership, and building out the business side of things, and not the technical side. Whether that's good or bad, not sure, right? It's somewhere on a spectrum. That's it's not a binary thing.
Cool. Do you miss coding at all?
I do not. No, I will be. I mean, in the meantime, I also picked up horticulture, growing vegetables,
Yeah,
and other like just things in nature, doing with nature. I think it's been a nice replacement. I mean, I miss some of the joy of coding in terms of you build a thing, you spend a while tinkering, then you see it work, and then you keep going. Right? There's something about that I miss, that I mostly get out of writing these days. Um, but I mean, there's still an engineer at heart, and I also think like even this tinkering works well in management. Right? There's a certain experimentation and feedback loop thing you can bring into engineering management, and management in particular. That is fun. But yeah, I don't miss it, but I miss some of the feeling of it, like the
aspects. Yeah.
progress, the reward. Because like if you build something in small increments, and you add functionality, and suddenly it becomes a thing that's magically starts working. There is some magic to that. There's like an intrinsic satisfaction to that process.
Definitely. There's nothing like solving a bug at 3 a.m.
Oh, I mean, I don't miss that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just
Way
kidding.
too many nights that I had my phone on this nightstand back here and would already wake up just when this screen came on. I didn't even have to wait for the call.
Yeah. Well, thank you
That
so
was
much
not
for your
healthy.
time and
You're very
sharing this with
welcome. It was a
us.
pleasure.
And yeah, I'll update the video online and share it with you. And if you're okay with sharing it with most of the people, I'll do that.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for
Cool.
having me, Sydney.
Thank you, Matthias.